There's a lot that I disliked about Game of Thrones season 8. And I know at this point it's been a few years, so it's kind of like, why are we still talking about season 8 of Game of Thrones? But I think that if you are a fan of this world, you can't help but talk about season 8 of Game of Thrones. Personally, I really enjoyed mostly everything from seasons 1 through 7 of the TV show series Game of Thrones. At the time, I hadn't read any of the books or anything like that, so now having read more of the books, doing, Wikipedia searches, honestly, watching House of the Dragon, reading Fire and Blood, X, Y, and Z, um, I can see where there's room certainly for criticism within the TV show adaptation of Game of Thrones, specifically after season 4. But for me personally, I enjoyed pretty much everything up to season 7. If you had asked me, and people certainly did prior to season 8, is Game of Thrones a great show? I would have said one of the best. And it's really hard to try to suggest to people to watch Game of Thrones because even people who've never watched it go, "Oh, I heard that season 8 kind of sucked." And it really does suck because I absolutely love House of the Dragons. As I said, I love reading the books. And for the most part, I love the show. So I get almost giddy when people talk about it and I go, "Oh, you should watch Game of Thrones." And then they remind me about the eighth season. And it's like, yeah, just don't watch it. There is so many things in season 8 that were terrible. I mean, one, the fact that it was only 6 episodes to end an entire series felt like the first slight, honestly. A lot of big things that I didn't like about it was Jamie going back to Cersei after he had finally gotten away from her, Arya killing the Night King, just the Golden Company being so misused in it and literally being there for 2 seconds. The entire Euron Greyjoy storyline was awful. Literally, I think one of the only things that I actually enjoyed out of season 8 was the Hound's ending. A lot of people at the time had a problem with the Hound's ending because he died by fire, which was honestly, obviously, the thing that he feared the most, considering his childhood with his brother, the Mountain. But I almost felt it was poetic for him to face the Mountain finally and die by fire because that was the thing that caused him to run away from King's Landing. And I don't know, there was something about it that I felt very poetic. I had thought the Hound was going to die seasons ago when you, as the viewer, thought that he did. So I honestly thought that was a pretty good ending for him. That was probably the only thing that I liked about season 8. And if there were some sort of rewrite of season 8, it's the only thing that I would even keep in there. Again, I could talk about the other things that I just mentioned before, but that would make this video way too long. So I'm just going to talk about the one storyline specifically in the final season that I absolutely hated, but also wonder that if it went in a different direction, if it would have made sense. And that, of course, is Daenerys Targaryen going mad. Obviously, the Game of Thrones, if you just watch the TV show, you very much have this idea of the Targaryens of being very mad. Daenerys's father was literally nicknamed the Mad King. Cersei has the line, and of course, I'm going to not say verbatim, but it's essentially, every time the gods flip a coin, or every time a Targaryen's born, the gods flip a coin, see where it lands. Pretty much that madness runs in the Targaryen family tree. And there was someone I'll try to see if I can find the video again, but there was someone who mentioned that madness in the Targaryens line isn't actually as common as you think it is, which I thought was very interesting. And then the more that I watched the show House of the Dragon, read Fire and Blood, yada yada, I am all for House Targaryen. There's a small part of me that sits there and goes, "You know what? Daenerys should have burned King's Landing and should not have ever made alliances with any of the houses. Screw them. Do what Aegon the Conqueror did and take the kingdoms by force." But, no, right? The whole entire show, we see Daenerys as this, you know, this icon, this symbol of peace, and she's the breaker of chains, the mother of dragons. I mean, she is someone who you think as you're watching the show is kind of the rightful person to rule the kingdom, not only because she's a Targaryen, but because we see Robert wasn't a good king. He was a very lax king. And then Joffrey certainly was horrible, and Cersei was horrible. And you sit there and go, Daenerys will be a better ruler than any of the other people that we've seen since the Targaryens no longer held the throne. And also another thing that I really hate about season 8, and I know that like Game of Thrones historians are probably going to hate me here. I hate the reveal that Jon Snow is Aegon Targaryen. I really like just the idea of him being a son of Ned Stark, and even though he's a Snow, that he is in reality a Stark and is a great representation of House Stark, who also have a very wonderful rich history within Westeros. I really like that. I know in the books that it's heavily implied that he is in fact the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. It's just not something personally I like, but I'll if it's truly revealed in the books that he is, then obviously I'll just accept it. But it's something I didn't like in the show because one, I just don't like the idea of him not being a Snow, but then also I just kind of hated how they even went about that whole storyline in the first place. So anyway, I hated that. I hated Jon and Daenerys getting together. I felt that there was absolutely no need for them to have any sort of romantic feelings towards each other. I feel like that was the showrunners' really shitty way of being like, look, it's the Song of Ice and Fire. Don't you get it? I hated that. But then so we see in season 8, right? Obviously Daenerys in season 7 finally came to Westeros. And it's almost this thing where we see Daenerys throughout the entire season as this like really wonderful person, this like freedom fighter almost. And then suddenly she's here and it's like, oh no, see, everyone's fears of a Targaryen are coming to light. She is taking things by force. She is being unreasonable. She is scary. And I just didn't like that at all. And then even once she literally helps people defeat the White Walkers and one of her dragons dies, it's still as if no one can trust her, no one's being nice to her, and all that. She's literally sacrificing the people who were closest to her for people to just not appreciate her efforts at all. She's losing her dragon, she's losing Missandei, Varys turned on her, everyone's turning on her. And then but still you still don't expect it to go the way that it does, because then in episode freaking 5, I believe, yeah, episode 5 of the freaking 6 episodes of the finale, you have Daenerys having this very, in my mind, almost an uncharacteristic moment where suddenly she just says F it and decides to let her dragon go loose on King's Landing, absolutely obliterating everyone, essentially confirming to people that the Targaryens should never rule Westeros again, and ultimately leading towards Jon Snow killing Daenerys, which then leads to Jon Snow going north with with Tormund and everything, and then Bran becoming the freaking king, right? Side note, I guess other things that I didn't mind about season 8, I actually didn't mind. A lot of people wanted Jon Snow to be the king, right? I almost didn't mind him going with Tormund. We saw that was actually a fleshed out thing in the show, that we saw Jon was actually loving his life with, I believe they were called the Free Folk, right? He loved there. It was a place where he, as a bastard, felt accepted finally, and he liked that. He liked living amongst that group and with Tormund. So I almost felt like, listen, even though it's pretty much in exile, he's kind of getting the life that he wanted to have. So I didn't mind that. I also didn't mind Sansa Stark becoming the Queen of the North. I think that it makes sense that the North honestly branched off. And for someone who always wanted to be queen, she finally gets to become queen. But yeah, no, Bran being king of the Six Kingdoms just made me physically ill, it felt like. But anyway, yeah. So where was I going with this? It So everything led to everything else, and it when you watch the 6 episodes, it feels so jarring to see Daenerys go from point A to point B. Obviously, she went through a lot in her journey, and then seeing her best friend killed and all that, having 0 support in Westeros, it felt like did to Daenerys feel very pressuring. And you can see where maybe someone could end up in a situation where she did how she did. On top of the fact also finding out that Jon Snow is actually a Targaryen and him being a man, unfortunately, would put him in a higher standing to be the heir to the throne than she is, and her spending all this time working towards the throne, that whatever. Anyway, I sit there and I go, if they had actually taken the time to develop this storyline, would it have made sense, right? Because I think we can all sit there and go, Game of Thrones should have been a much longer show, or maybe not a much longer, but I do believe 2 or 3 seasons would have been sufficient to flesh a lot of things out, to flesh out the character of Euron Greyjoy, to flesh out the Golden Company, even if you wanted to really flesh out more Jamie going back to Cersei and saying, because they are twins and they've been together for so long, and it's the unfortunate reality that even though she's so shitty to him, that he would still feel that pull to be with her. You could have certainly stretched all of that out more. And so if you had it where maybe Daenerys is in Westeros, they defeat the White Walkers, but now you still have Cersei there, you have Daenerys trying to garner support from the lords and ladies of Westeros, and have it where she's slowly developing the quote unquote Targaryen madness. I think if we, the viewers, would have seen over a 2 season arc of more than 6 episodes, right? Go back to the 10 episodes that almost all the seasons were. If you went back to 10 episodes, stretched it out to 2 or 3 seasons, I think then it would have made more sense. Then you could say, okay, Daenerys being through everything that she's been through, she has tried everything else to not only garner support, to fight against Cersei and the Lannisters, and Cersei having the Golden Company. And then I think at that point, if Daenerys saw that nothing else was working, and then she was slow, and then we see the madness developing over that time, I think then it could have made more sense. But from what we saw, what just felt so jarring and felt so unlike Daenerys. There's a lot of people who will say, no, there were things along the way that showcase that she was getting to that point. Obviously, she is no stranger to burning people with her dragons if they do not bend the knee to her. That certainly happened in season 7, but it happened less enough, if that makes sense. It happened so few times that by the time it got to the finale of Game of Thrones, it felt very out of place. It didn't feel like this is something Daenerys does all the time. This is something that Daenerys does on a whim. And again, you can make the argument that she is in a very emotionally vulnerable state, but I don't think that that should just be used as a excuse, honestly. We all waited 2 years for the finale of Game of Thrones, and again, for it to be so so poorly done, and to be so short, and to just not do a lot of the things that were promised. I mean, remember, what about the prophecy of Cersei being killed by her younger brother? What was the point of Arya becoming a faceless man and all that? There were so many things that never came to fruition, never had like an ending or anything like that. It was just bad writing, bad direction, and clearly a rush job to end a lot of the things that Game of Thrones set up for. Um, and I believe, quote me, let me know if I'm wrong, but the whole thing was that the creators behind the TV show were gearing up to do a Star Wars trilogy, and now they don't do the Star Wars trilogy because obviously the reception for Game of Thrones season 8 was so poor, they lost out on that. So it's like we as Game of Thrones fans lost out because they were just so excited to get rid of the show to move on to the next franchise. That sucks, honestly. Who knows if their movies would have been any better than what we got in the sequel series of Star Wars. That's a story for another time. But I do feel that it could have worked a little with Daenerys doing what she did if it just had been developed better. Now, again, I have become a complete House Targaryen supporter, and I am there sitting and saying a Targaryen needed to have been on the throne because every ruler that was there after the Mad King was absolute shit, selfish, and all that. I mean, you can say that probably about most rulers, but it just seemed that not having a Targaryen on the throne was probably the worst thing for Westeros. But again, I'll let some other a of Ice and Fire historians do that instead of me. But in my opinion, you have Daenerys go through what she went through, develop it better, let us see her slowly turning mad and burn down King's Landing, but then still have her ruling Westeros. I mean, again, Aegon the Conqueror did it, and maybe Daenerys could have taken a stance where she would have allowed houses that bent the knee to her to remain with their titles. Do something similar to what Aegon did, and then it would have made more sense. I mean, in a show like Game of Thrones, where everyone is kind of going against each other, not all of your favorites are going to end up on the same side. Some of them are going to lose. And in my opinion, I don't know, House Targaryen deserves to be on the throne. That's just my hot take there. But yeah, I mean, that's just what I'm trying to sit here and say, that I just believe that Daenerys could have gone mad if she did go mad. Again, it's like, is it going mad to really experience all the grief that she experienced? I mean, the funny thing about the end of Game of Thrones, where Tyrion says, "Oh, who has a better story than Bran?" And it's like everyone in the show has had some sort of tragedy that has shaped them. I mean, Sansa Stark is certainly not the person that she was in the beginning. Neither is Arya. Neither is Theon, literally anyone else. So I mean, yeah, they all went through their fucked up shit, and can you really blame Daenerys? I don't know. Like at the time it happened, I was like, no, oh my God, this is horrible. This is absolutely terrible. And yes, it is still absolutely horrible and terrible, but could have actually been decent writing if you had better writers and more time to actually develop this. Another side note, actually, when I sit there and think about it, Theon did have a great redemption arc in season 8. His character definitely was a character that went through the ringer, and his story. So again, like, was season 8 like absolutely awful? Yes, throw it out. I hated it, but there were little things in it that if you pluck them out and put them in a rewrite would actually still have been good. It'll be very interesting to see where George R. R. Martin goes in his stories. I didn't know this, but it has been very long. I think people have waited just as long for the next Game of Thrones book as they have for GTA 6, and that's crazy. Um, so I had bought the Fire and Blood Part 1 book a while ago, and I read through it, and now because I'm like super into audiobooks and Audible, I actually am now re-listening to it on Audible. And that's very good. And as much as I do obviously want the Winds of Winter to come out, I am sitting there also wanting the second part of Fire and Blood to come out. But that came out in 2018. So let's be real, we're not getting that for a while. But hopefully we're getting Winds of Winter soon. And I think it's really interesting in the books. And I've not done a shit ton of research on this, but in the books, they're introducing other characters who could have a potential claim to the throne. And it's kind of sad that we never really got to see that in the show. I mean, obviously, we have House of Dragons, so it's nice to see more live action in this world, and it actually seems like it's being done right. But we know we're not going to get a rewrite of season 8, right? Maybe hopefully you get a soft retcon, but who knows? It's like that is just how the TV show ends, and we just have to wait for the books for a different ending. But if you're someone who doesn't want to read the books, you just solely want to enjoy the TV show, that is your ending, and that sucks. But again, um I could probably ramble on and on about this. I just wanted to know your guys' thoughts and feelings on it. Do you feel that Daenerys could have had the same outcome that she did in the show if it was just developed better? Would you have accepted her eventual turn if we had gotten more seasons where we actually showed the decline of her, sanity and her going mad? Or in your mind, you don't believe that Daenerys would have done that at all, and for them to have done that is a complete bastardization of her character. Please let me know. Let me know what you guys are looking forward to in House of the Dragon season two. Are you strictly a TV viewer, or have you actually read the books? And if so, what's the thing from the books that you wished they had put in the TV show? I do want to know that. I'm also involved in another YouTube channel, Geek Vibes Nation, where I posted a top 10 moments from season one of House of the Dragon. So please make sure you check that out as well. I don't know what I'm doing with my personal channel. I'm just like, let me put things here that is just more so me rambling instead of the actual constructive, uh, better timed, better written stuff that I put out on GVN. But yeah, let me know. And until next time, guys, bye.